Got an excellent little trout nymph to tie up today. This is a Beadhead Green Rock Worm. The rock worm fly that I was introduced to was tied similar to this with a peacock Herl head on it. But I like the glass beads on it. Adds a little bit more weight, a little bit more sheen, a little flash to it. And they're just fun to tie. They're just awfully fun to tie. So if you need a nice trout nymph, most streams have caddis in them. Most trout streams have a lot of caddis in them. Check under the rocks, see what you got. If you've got some green caddis down there, tie up some of these Beadhead Green Rock Worms and go to your favorite stream and have some fun. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start the Beadhead Green Rock Worm by placing the hook in the vise. When I put this in the vise, I'm actually going to angle the hook shank and the eye of the hook in a downward direction a little bit. It doesn't really affect how I tie the fly, but what it does is it helps keep that bead up towards the eye of the hook while I'm tying. This hook is a Mustad C53S curved caddis hook. This is a size 14. You could certainly use just a regular 3906 or 3906B, which is a standard nymph hook. It doesn't have to be a curved hook. I'm going to put some lead on the hook shank here. I'm using a .010 lead for this. I'm going to put 15 wraps of lead on the hook shank. You can put more or less if you want to vary up the amount of weight on this. So I have the lead wraps on the hook shank. I'm going to squish them all together. And I'm going to keep them pretty much right here at the end of the shank where the hook starts to bend down a little bit. I want to leave this area right here open. I've got a collar that's going to go in here. And I want to be careful not to add a lot of material right behind the bead, because then my collar could end up actually wrapping on top of that bead. For thread, I'm just using a Uni-80 in black. I'm going to attach my thread behind the bead along the hook shank. I'm going to advance my thread down the hook shank to where I get right up to the lead. At this point, I'm going to reach with my thread behind the lead wraps. I want to be careful not to pull too hard, because my thread could actually push the lead down the hook shank. And I'm just going to put a few wraps in here just to secure that lead in place. For the most part, the lead's going to be wrapped under dubbing and it won't move once the fly is tied. But I like to put just a few wraps front and back across that just to help hold it in place. Be careful you don't build up too much of a thread dam behind the lead here, because we're going to tie in our rib. And we're going to have the end of the rib match up almost right exactly to that lead to give us a nice smooth body. For rib, I'm using a UTC wire. This is a black in size medium. And I'm going to attach my rib right on the underside of the hook shank, such that the end of it just matches right up to the end of that lead. And again, what this does is it ensures that we have a smoother transition right there and a smoother body. And advance my thread down the bend of the hook, deep into the bend all the way down to the end. Then I'm going to bring it up a couple of spiral wraps to just about where it hangs over the barb of the hook. Now it's time to dub the body. I'm just using a Caddis green Antron dubbing, generally a light green, even along the lines of a fluorescent green is what you would use for this. But you could, if you only have, say, like a Highlander green or something like that, that would work. Now I'm going to make about a 2.5 to 3 inch dubbing noodle. And I want to make certain that I taper this. I like to initially just go ahead and put light, very light layer of dubbing on the thread to about 2.5 to 3 inches. You do a bunch of these, a couple dozen or so, and you'll start to be able to gauge the actual length. What I want to make certain is that on the bottom side here, I should say the top of the noodle right here, that this is very sparse and tapered. And the reason for that is that that's going to be our initial tail, I should say back end of the fly, and I want it very, very narrow down to the hook, and then it'll start to taper and get bigger as we tie the fly. So after I make certain I've got that nice gentle taper right there for a small butt end, then I can start putting a little bit more dubbing on up towards what will be the front of the body, just to thicken that up a little bit. I am not as experienced in dubbing and dubbing techniques as I'd like to be. I'm certain there are some people who could very quickly get all the dubbing on the thread and get this wrapped very quick and easy, but this is my method. So once I have that, then I can go ahead and start wrapping this on. I have a little bit of a bare thread right here which works just fine, and I want to try and keep that there because then my first few wraps are going back down the bend of the hook to the very end, and you'll see by the time I get all that bare thread wrapped on, I'm now engaging the dubbing right at the back end where I want it to be. And you just wrap that on really nice and thin and sparse, just covering up those thread wraps, and as I wrap up the hook shank, this will get thicker and thicker, and now you can see my body is actually getting much thicker and juicier bug. I'm going to end my thread wraps right behind the bead here, and I'm going to use the bead to push all that dubbing back a little bit up towards the thread, the lead. What this will also do is it gives me a gap behind the bead of about a bead width for my collar. But you'll notice I have a nice tapered body here. And in the back, if some of that black thread is kind of showing through because that's so sparse back there, that's fine. A lot of the green caddis will actually have a dark spot on the back end. I'm going to take my rib, palmer this forward. I'm going to put about 4 to 5 wraps to rib the body of this. I'll end with my rib right up in front of the dubbing. I'm going to secure that in with about a half dozen or so wraps. Snug my bobbin up to the fly to brace the fly, and then I can just rotate and twist that wire and it'll pop right off. Now I have a space behind the bead right here that's tapered a little bit. I have more wraps right in front of the dubbing than I do behind the bead. I want to smooth that out. So I want a nice level area for wrapping my collar in. Be careful though that you don't add too many thread wraps and bulk that out. As I said, if the thread gets to the point where it's about the same thickness as the body here, then your collar can end up trying to wrap over the bead. For a collar on this, I'm using some Ostrich Herl. Just get a whole feather, cut a couple of pieces of Herl out, and that's what we'll use for our collar. I'm just going to match the butt ends here together, and that's what I'm going to tie in right behind the bead. I got to give my bobbin a counterclockwise twist. All of the wrapping that we did with the dubbing and filling in or smoothing out that space behind the bead basically gives it a lot of a twist, and when I wrap the thread around, it's going to want to jump over the bead towards the front of the hook. Don't want that. I want it so that when I loosen a little tension, it'll go towards the back of the hook. That way I can get just enough tension, just enough loose thread to wrap down onto that Herl and bring it down to the hook right behind the bead. Keep that nice and smooth. I'm going to put in 1/2 hitch right behind the bead, because I'm going to use the rotary features of my vise to put that collar on. But remember, when I put the hook in the vise, the shank of the hook was pointing downward a little bit to keep that bead kind of out of my way as I was working on the other parts of the fly. If I try to rotate this now, what that's going to do is it's going to change this angle, so my herl will be wrapping kind of off angle back and forth. So I'm going to loosen up the vise a little bit, and I'm going to bring that hook shank more horizontal. That way, when I'm wrapping that collar in, it's just going to be wrapping nice and smooth. I'll bring my bobbin cradle in, and I'll just start rotating that herl, or I should say the fly, to get the collar on. I'm going to hold it fairly tight so that I get a collar building towards the back of the overall collar. And then I'm going to start bringing those herls forward and angle those a little bit on top of that bead. They'll slide right behind the bead and wedge behind it, and it gives you a nice full collar. Now, you be careful here when you're wrapping this in. You don't want to break them off, but you also don't want to trap a bunch of fibers, herl fibers, on the bead side of the thread. You want to try and make certain that the herl is all going to be behind there. Plus the fact you don't want to put in too many wraps, because you can build this space up, and I don't want to have, say, a band of thread exposed here. So I get 2 wraps around the herl, cut that off, and I'm going to put 1 more wrap just to double secure it. Then I'm going to get my whip finish tool out and go ahead and put in a 2-3 turn whip finish. As you can see, I'm already starting to open up a little space behind the bead there, but that's fine. So that's all nice and secure. I have a nice smooth collar. That's basically all the legs for my little caddis. I'll turn the fly over, and I'm going to put just half a drop of head cement on the back edge of that bead, and it'll just soak down, run down that bead and soak down into those threads. I want to make certain that I'm not getting a bunch of head cement on the actual fibers themselves. That is the Beadhead Green Rock Worm. Quick, easy fly. In an hour, 2 hours, you can have a couple of dozen of these, different sizes. You can change up the bead a little bit, put in a pearl clear glass bead, or even like a gold bead or something like that if you want. Excellent trout fly. Everybody should have some in their box. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video and not only learned a new pattern, but maybe learned some new techniques and a few new skills. If you like this video, please hit that thumbs up button below. You can support Dressed Irons by hitting the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are published. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.